I have always been a night owl, but something about this evening felt different. The soft glow of my laptop screen lit up my small studio apartment, casting long shadows over the scattered canvases leaning against the walls. My latest painting, a mix of dark blues and purples, sat unfinished on the easel, almost mocking me. I sighed, running a hand through my messy hair. It was one of those months where money felt tighter than ever. Rent was overdue, and bills were piling up. Like a stack of Jenga blocks ready to fall, my art, something I had dedicated my life to, was giving me nothing in return. It was ironic. I was surrounded by my own work, yet I couldn't even afford to keep the lights on. That's when I saw it, a small ad tucked into a corner of a job listings website. Night guard needed, California Arts Center. My cursor hovered over the link. Desperation and curiosity guided my hand. The California Arts Center was nothing like the small, run-down galleries I usually visited. It was a high-class place with perfect lighting and polished floors that probably cost more than my entire apartment. I clicked the ad and scanned the job details. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady, just a few nights a week. It didn't seem too bad. I'd be standing around, keeping watch, maybe even getting inspired by the artwork. It felt like a way out, a lifeline in the middle of my financial struggles. Without thinking twice, I sent in my application. To my surprise, I got a response within the hour. They scheduled an interview for the next day. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, my mind racing. What if this was my chance to be surrounded by real artists, to be close to masterpieces? Or was I just clinging to false hope, desperate for anything? The interview was strange. The gallery manager, a thin man with silver-framed glasses and a permanent frown, barely looked up from his clipboard. His office was cold and empty. No paintings, no sculptures, just a huge desk and a ticking clock that seemed louder with each second. "You'll work from midnight to 5 a.m., he said in a dull voice. "Your job is simple. Patrol the gallery, report anything unusual, and do not touch the artwork." I nodded, trying to seem eager. "Of course, sir. I respect art. I'm actually an artist myself." He cut me off with a wave of his hand. "That doesn't matter. Can you follow instructions?" The question caught me off guard. "Yes, of course." "Good." He scribbled something on his clipboard. "You start tomorrow night. Don't be late." And just like that, I was hired. It felt cold and impersonal, like I was just another piece in the gallery, something to be placed and forgotten. But I couldn't afford to be picky. As I walked out of his office, a strange sense of unease crept over me. I brushed it off as nerves, unaware of the long, dark nights that lay ahead. The day of my first shift dragged on painfully slow. I tried to distract myself, to settle into some kind of routine, but my mind kept drifting back to the empty office, the manager's harsh tone, and the feeling that something was off. I spent the morning lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks with my eyes as if they were rivers on a map. By noon, I forced myself up and grabbed a bowl of cereal. It tasted like cardboard. In the afternoon, I sat at my easel, trying to paint, but the inspiration just wasn't there. Every brushstroke felt wrong, every color choice a mistake. After an hour of frustration, I threw the brush aside. I tried watching TV, flipping through channels mindlessly. News reports, sitcoms, game shows, it all blurred together. The clock on the wall seemed to mock me, its hands crawling forward at a painfully slow pace. By 9 p.m., my stomach reminded me that I hadn't eaten since that tasteless bowl of cereal. I rummaged through my nearly empty cupboards and settled on eggs and toast, simple but enough. As I ate, I wondered what kind of meals the famous artists whose work I'd be guarding enjoyed. Did they eat in fancy restaurants, their food arranged as carefully as their paintings? Or were they like me, scraping by with whatever they could afford? After dinner, I tried to nap, knowing I'd need the energy for my shift, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind kept spinning. What if I messed up? What if I accidentally damaged something priceless? The what ifs stacked up like the unpaid bills on my desk, threatening to crush me. At 11:30 p.m., I gave up on sleep. I took a quick shower, though the lukewarm water did little to calm my nerves. I dressed in the best clothes I had, a pair of black slacks that were only a little wrinkled, and a dark blue button-up that had seen better days. I tied a simple knot in my tie and caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. The face staring back at me looked older, more tired than I remembered. Dark circles shadowed my eyes, and stubble covered my jaw. I didn't look like a security guard. I looked like someone who needed one. I grabbed a jacket. The nights could get chilly, and stepped outside. The walk to the gallery wasn't far, but each step felt heavy with anticipation. The streets were strangely quiet, as if the whole city was holding its breath. The streetlights above hummed softly, their glow artificial and eerie. For a moment, I hesitated. Being a night guard wasn't exactly my dream job, but I needed the money. And who knew? Maybe I'd find something inspiring. Maybe this was the turning point I had been waiting for. As I reached the gallery, its grand entrance stood tall before me. During the day, it was a symbol of culture and elegance, but at night it felt different. Shadows clung to its edges, and the windows reflected the streetlights like watchful eyes. I arrived just after midnight. The main entrance was locked, but the side door was slightly open, held by a small stone. The manager had not mentioned anything about that. I shrugged it off. Galleries can be strange like that sometimes. I had no idea that this small detail was the beginning of a terrifying night. As I stepped inside, silence wrapped around me. It was the kind of quiet that makes you question every step, where even your breathing feels too loud. The artworks that were full of life during the day now seemed hidden in the shadows, their painted eyes feeling strangely real. I walked through the main exhibition hall, my footsteps echoing off the high ceilings. The paintings, their colors dim under the emergency lights, seemed to whisper. A large abstract canvas with sharp lines and bold strokes appeared to shift as I passed. I blinked, and it was still again. Just a trick of the light, I told myself. At the back of the hall, I found a small security desk. It had only a chair, a set of keys, and a logbook where I was supposed to write down anything unusual. I sat down, the chair creaking loudly in the silence. That's when I noticed something strange. A framed painting behind the desk had a list taped to its back. 9 rules, neatly typed. It didn't make sense. Was this an art piece? A joke left by the previous night guard? I leaned in, curiosity growing. The list read, 1. Do not touch any artwork after 1 a.m. 2. If you hear footsteps behind you, do not turn around. 3. The West Wing is off limits after 2 a.m. 4. If you see a figure in the hallway, do not acknowledge it. 5. Do not let the clock in the lobby strike 3:15. 6. If the phone rings, answer only on the second ring. If it rings more than twice, do not answer. 7. You must go up the east staircase before 2:45 a.m. never after. 8. At 4 a.m., the lights will flicker. Do not move until they stop. 9. Leave the building by 5 a.m., no exceptions. I let out a nervous laugh, but the silence swallowed it instantly. It had to be a joke. Maybe some sort of performance art designed to mess with people. Still, something about the specific wording made me uneasy. I pulled out my phone to call the manager and ask about the list, but there was no signal. In the middle of the city, my phone couldn't find a single bar. A cold feeling ran down my spine. Suddenly, I felt very alone. The first hour of my shift was uneventful. I kept busy by walking around, checking locks, and glancing into dark corners. But the silence and the dim lighting started to get to me. The paintings that once looked beautiful now felt unsettling. A landscape painting of a peaceful forest seemed darker than before. The trees looked thicker, their branches stretching like clawed fingers. A sculpture of a human figure seemed to have moved slightly, its blank eyes following me as I passed. I shook off the feeling. It was just my imagination, fueled by exhaustion and those creepy rules. By 1:15 a.m., I was restless. The gallery was too quiet, the art too still. The hours dragged on endlessly. I found myself back at the security desk, flipping through the logbook. The previous entries were ordinary, false alarms, visitors staying late, nothing suggesting anything supernatural. Then, I saw a small sculpture in the corner of the room. I hadn't noticed it before, which was odd since I had been paying close attention to everything. It was a simple, abstract figure, yet undeniably human, carved from smooth white marble. Something about it drew me in, the curves, the way the light hit its surface. Without thinking, I crossed the room. I stood before it, mesmerized. My hand lifted on its own, reaching out. A warning echoed in my mind. Rule 1. Do not touch any artwork after 1 a.m. But it was too late. My fingers brushed against the cool stone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the marble felt warm under my touch. The air around me changed. It wasn't just colder, it felt different, charged. The silence, already heavy, now felt alive. I pulled my hand back, my heart pounding. Still, nothing happened. I exhaled, realizing I had been holding my breath. Maybe it was all in my head, just stress, lack of sleep. But as I turned to walk away, something made me freeze. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the sculpture move. It was barely noticeable, just the slightest shift. I spun around, but it was still. Just my imagination, I told myself. It had to be. But deep down, I knew something had changed. The night was far from over. The next hour passed in a haze of tension. Every shadow seemed darker, every sound amplified. The gallery, once a place of creativity, now felt like a trap. I tried to distract myself by sketching in my notebook, but the faces I drew were wrong, twisted, distorted. Frustrated, I tore out the pages and stuffed them into my pocket. By 2 a.m., the gallery itself felt different. The hallways seemed longer, stretching unnaturally. The paintings, once inviting, now felt watchful. The peaceful forest scene I had noticed earlier was now pitch black. The trees, so dense they seemed to absorb the light. The human sculpture had definitely changed its pose, more hunched, more menacing. The small marble piece I had touched was something I couldn't bring myself to look at directly, but I could feel it, like an invisible presence burning into the back of my skull. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second echoing in the emptiness. Its face seemed larger somehow, and the hands moved with a slow, deliberate pace that felt almost mocking. I found myself standing near the entrance to the West Wing, drawn by a morbid curiosity. Rule 3 echoed in my mind. The West Wing is off limits after 2 a.m. I peered down the dark hallway, where display cases lined the walls, their contents hidden in shadow. At the far end, barely visible, stood a simple wooden door with a brass handle. There was nothing special about it, yet it made my skin crawl. As I stared, the handle seemed to turn ever so slightly. My heart pounded as I stumbled backward. This was insanity. My imagination was playing tricks on me, making me see things that couldn't be real. Determined to regain control, I turned away from the West Wing. That's when I heard it. Soft footsteps behind me. My body went cold. Rule 2 flashed through my mind. If you hear footsteps behind you, do not turn around. My breath caught in my throat. The sound grew closer, slow and deliberate. It wasn't the brisk pace of a fellow security guard or the hesitant steps of a lost visitor. These footsteps had intent, and that intent sent a chill through me. Something feather-light brushed against the back of my neck. I stood frozen, my heart pounding, sweat forming on my forehead. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to fight, to do anything. But the rules were clear. Don't turn around. I clenched my fists and squeezed my eyes shut. The presence behind me felt massive and oppressive. I could hear its breathing, ragged, unnatural. A sob built in my throat. but I forced it back. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The footsteps faded. The presence vanished. I was alone again in the silence of the gallery. I collapsed to my knees, gasping for air. Was I losing my mind, or was there something truly sinister about this place? Something the rules were meant to protect me from? As I tried to collect myself, I noticed something on the floor, a small, white feather. It was delicate, impossibly pristine. I reached out to touch it, but the moment my fingers made contact, it disintegrated into fine ash. Scrambling to my feet, I rushed back to the security desk. The logbook sat there, mundane and unassuming. With shaking hands, I flipped to the current date. My pen hovered over the blank page. What could I possibly write? 2:15 a.m. Heard footsteps. Felt a presence. Found a feather that turned to ash. It sounded insane, but I knew what I had experienced was real. In the end, I simply wrote, 2:15 a.m. Disturbance in main hall investigated. Nothing found. It felt like a lie, but what else could I do? I couldn't sit still. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every piece of art seemed alive, their subjects shifting when I wasn't looking directly at them. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with whispers just below the threshold of hearing, with movement just out of sight. I found myself constantly checking the list of rules, committing them to memory. They were no longer a joke. They were a lifeline, the only thing standing between me and whatever lurked in this gallery at night. At 2:40 a.m., I remembered Rule 7. The east staircase must be ascended before 2:45. Never after. Panic gripped me. I had no idea where the east staircase was, and I only had 5 minutes to find it. I sprinted through the gallery, my footsteps echoing through the cavernous space. Sweat trickled down my back as I frantically searched. The artwork seemed to leer at me, their painted eyes following my desperate race. With less than a minute to spare, I finally found it, a narrow staircase tucked away in a corner. I took the steps 2 at a time, my lungs burning. Just as I reached the top, the clock somewhere struck 2:45. The second floor was different. The air was thicker, harder to breathe. The artworks here were abstract, dark, swirling colors that seemed to pulse and shift. I wanted to go back downstairs, but something told me that wasn't an option anymore. By 3 a.m., my nerves were frayed. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow held a hidden terror. Then the phone on the desk rang, shattering the silence. Rule 6 echoed in my mind. If the phone rings, answer only on the second ring. If it rings more than twice, do not answer. The second ring came. My trembling hand lifted the receiver. Hello? My voice barely held steady. Silence. No static. No breathing. Just an empty void. My skin prickled. I slowly set the phone down. I glanced at the clock. 3:14 a.m. Horror washed over me. Rule 5. Do not let the clock in the lobby strike 3:15. I bolted out of my chair and ran. The ticking grew impossibly loud. The second hand blurred as it raced toward the mark. Just as it hit 3:15, I grabbed the clock and smashed it against the floor. The glass shattered. The ticking stopped, but the silence that followed wasn't comforting. It was heavy, suffocating, like the calm before a storm. Then, a sound, soft, rhythmic tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. I spun around, searching for the source, but it always seemed to shift just out of view. And then I saw it. At the end of the hallway, barely visible in the dim light, a figure stood. It was unnaturally tall, its head nearly brushing the ceiling. It was darker than the shadows, as if it was made from the absence of light itself. Rule 4 flashed through my mind. If you see a figure standing in the hallway, do not acknowledge it. But it was too late. I had seen it, and it had seen me. The figure moved toward me, its motions jerky and unnatural like a marionette controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. Each step produced that dreadful tapping sound. I ran. I tore through the twisting hallways, past paintings that reached out with painted hands, trying to grab me. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but no matter how fast I ran, the tapping never grew farther away. At last, I found myself back at the security desk. The list of rules sat there, glowing in the dim light, a beacon of sanity in this nightmare. I collapsed into the chair, gasping for breath. The tapping had stopped. The figure was gone. But I knew, deep in my bones, that this night was far from over. I had broken too many rules to hope for an easy escape. At 4 a.m., the lights flickered, just as Rule 8 had predicted. I stood frozen, not daring to move until the lights stopped flickering. In the moments of darkness, I heard whispers, felt cold breaths on my neck, and saw flashes of things that shouldn't exist. When the lights steadied, I was alone again, but the eerie presence lingered. As 5 a.m. approached, a mix of relief and fear filled me. Rule 9 was clear: leave the building by 5 a.m., no exceptions. I watched the clock, my body tense, ready to run at 4:59. The moment it hit 5 o'clock, I grabbed my keys and rushed out the door. Stepping into the pre-dawn air, I took deep breaths like I had never appreciated fresh air before. I had made it. I had survived the night. Or so I thought. As I walked home, the events replayed in my mind like a nightmare. My hands trembled, my nerves were wrecked, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I collapsed into bed, exhausted, but sleep brought no comfort. My dreams were filled with disturbing images, dark figures, twisted artworks, and endless mazes. I woke up feeling empty, like something had been taken from me during the night. Still shaken, I decided to go for a walk, hoping it would clear my mind and convince me it was all just stress playing tricks on me. The morning was bright. The streets were coming to life. But then I saw something through a cafe window that made my blood run cold. It was the sculpture, the same white marble figure I had touched the night before. It sat casually on a table, surrounded by coffee cups and pastries. A customer reached out and moved it aside without a second thought. My heart pounded as I stumbled backward. This wasn't possible. I turned onto the next street, trying to escape, but then I saw it again. A painting from the gallery hung in a shop window. It showed a dark figure standing in a hallway, its proportions wrong, its eyes following me as I walked past. No matter where I went, the art followed. A sketch pinned to a notice board, a mural on a building. Everywhere, the twisted imagery from the gallery appeared. Even graffiti seemed to have taken on the eerie, lifelike quality of the paintings. The rules might have stayed behind in the building, but the gallery itself had clung to me. It had seeped into my world, or maybe it had changed me, altering the way I saw reality. As I stood frozen in realization, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned, dreading what I might see. It was the gallery manager. His silver-framed glasses caught the morning light, and he smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "Good job last night," he said in his flat, emotionless voice. "We'll see you again tonight. Don't be late." Before I could react, he disappeared into the morning crowd. But his words stayed with me, a command, a threat. That's when I realized my shift hadn't ended at 5 a.m. It had only just begun. The gallery wasn't just a place anymore, it was everywhere, and its rules still applied. As I walked home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, watching for dark figures in hallways, listening for footsteps behind me. The 9 rules echoed in my mind like a survival mantra. Don't touch the art. Don't turn around. Don't acknowledge the figures. The sun rose higher, but for me, the night hadn't ended. Somewhere, deep in my mind, I could hear a clock ticking, counting down the hours until I had to return. I told myself I could just quit, walk away from the job, and leave the madness behind. But I knew it wasn't that simple. That night, I called in sick, my voice shaky as I left a message on the gallery's answering machine. The moment I hung up, my phone rang. It was the gallery's number. I stared at it, remembering the rule, answer on the second ring. But it rang a third time, then a fourth. I didn't pick up. It kept ringing all night and only stopped at exactly 5 a.m. The next day, I didn't sleep. I tried to lose myself in my art, to find some normalcy again. But every time I put brush to canvas, what came out was dark, twisted, things I had seen in the gallery. Figures with stretched limbs and hollow eyes. Landscapes that seemed to shift and breathe. I ripped apart canvas after canvas, but I couldn't escape its influence. I only went outside when necessary, but every trip became a nightmare. The gallery's art had infected the entire city. It was everywhere, in store windows, on billboards, even in the clouds. Sometimes I'd blink, and it would be gone, replaced by normal sights. But I knew what I had seen. People started noticing my strange behavior. Friends called, worried about my isolation. I couldn't answer. How could I explain without sounding insane? A week later, I received a letter. The envelope was blank, except for my name written in elegant, old-fashioned handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It read, "Your shift begins at midnight. The rules have changed. Be ready." There was no signature, but I knew exactly who had sent it. The gallery was calling me back. I thought about running, leaving town, never looking back. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. The gallery would find me. It was everywhere now, in every painting, every sculpture, in every shadow. As midnight approached, I found myself standing outside the gallery once again. The building looked the same, but now I could feel the wrongness that lurked within. The air was thick, the shadows deeper. I took a deep breath and reached for the door handle. I hesitated. Did I really want to go back in? Did I have a choice? Then I felt something behind me. I remembered the rule, don't turn around. But I did. Standing on the sidewalk was me, an exact copy of myself. But its grin was too wide, splitting its face unnaturally. Its eyes were black voids. Its skin rippled, shifting like water. It raised a hand and pointed at the gallery door. The message was clear. Go inside, or face something much worse out here. My hands trembled as I turned the handle. The door clicked shut behind me. Inside, the gallery was darker than before. The artworks glowed with a strange light, their subjects moving inside their frames. The silence pressed in on me, broken only by my own shaky breaths. On the security desk, a new list of rules waited. As I stepped forward to read them, I knew this wasn't just a job anymore. This was my reality, a nightmare I might never wake up from. I picked up the list. Rule number 1. The gallery is everywhere now. The shift never ends. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and prepared for another night of horrors. But this time, I knew the sunrise wouldn't set me free. The gallery had claimed me, and it would never let me go.